is dedicated by Rebecca Rifkin for the first yortzeit of her husband, Rabbi Dr. Yisrael Rifkin, Yisrael ben Raphael Zev, for a few years. Rabbi and Mrs. Rifkin actually lived in West Hartford, Connecticut. So Rabbi Rifkin, Zichrono Livracha, was a very positive influence on myself and other people growing up. So I'm very, very honored to. I'm very honored to. Okay. I'm very honored to be able to give a shir l'zecher nishmato. And as I say, we always have to be makar tov to the mentors that helped us as we were growing up. In addition, the shir is dedicated anonymously for the refuah shlema of Oksana Bat Bluma. And again, may she have a refuah shlema b'toch shar chole Yisrael. This is, of course, the last week of the year. And there's an old tradition that is recorded that the last week of the year, you can be misaken all of the sins that were committed on that particular day of the week. So today is Tuesday, so this can be an atonement for all of Tuesday's Averos. Wednesday, I'm sorry, you already missed Monday? Okay, hopefully you don't do any Averos on Monday, you're coming off a weekend. Well, yeah, for Eretz Yisrael, of course, we don't have the concept of Sunday as a weekend anyway. But that's why this last week is actually very, very important, because one could indeed be mitaken. You know, it's often the case that people have a tremendous amount of enthusiasm at the beginning of an endeavor, but by the end it peters out. And of course, that's why Rosh Hashanah, we're excited, etc. But the truth of the matter is, the way you end something is more important than the way you begin it. This is a pasuk in Koheles, Tov acharit davar mireshito, that the end of something is more significant than the beginning of it. So in many, many ways, if we're looking for brachos and hatzlacha in the new year, we try to rectify and we try to correct and end the old year in a very, very good way. So back to our subject, we are looking at the Rambam's letter, Ma'amar Techiyas HaMesim, his letter on resurrection, where the Rambam was accused of not believing in resurrection or bodily resurrection, and the Rambam defended himself and pointed to the fact that he did indeed mention the importance of resurrection a number of times, albeit very, very, very briefly, and the like. And last week, I went over the Shita of the Ramban, Rav Moshe ben Nachman, in the Sefer Shar HaGemul, which is really Chelik Gimel of a larger book, TORAH Sa'adam. Remember, TORAH Sa'adam is mainly about the laws of mourning, but the third part of TORAH Sa'adam is Shar HaGemul, that deals with the whole area of reward and punishment after death. And today I want to go over the Rambam in particular, as the Rambam articulates it, both in this letter and in Mishnah Torah, and to point out the way that he diverges from the Ramban, which became the standard learning. The Ramban's description, as we talked about last week, became the standard account of what happens after death, but the Rambam had very significant different views on this whole thing. So let's first start off, a person dies. So far, the beginning is going to be very much the same as the Ramban, but according to the Rambam, a person dies, a person is subject to heavenly judgment, and people are sorted into three categories: Tzaddik, Rasha, Benoni. Right? Tzaddik is a righteous person, a Rasha is an evil person, a Benoni is a middle of the roader. And by the way, an interesting little thought, the word for congregation is called a tzibor. I don't know if you ever heard this, but some say that tzibor is Rashi Tevos, is an acronym for tzadikim, Benonim, Urishaim, that a tzibor has to comprise like everybody. Everybody is part of the tzibor. But be it as it may, the Rambam's definition of tzaddik, rasha, benoni starts off as a very quantitative measure. And that is, if you're 51% mitzvos and only 49% averos, you are qualified as a tzaddik. If you're 51% Averos and 49% mitzvos, even though you have a lot of mitzvos, you are a Rasha. Benoni seems to be a very odd and rare category of 50-50. Now, after the Rambam gives this kind of crude quantification, the Rambam then goes on and says it's not simply a mechanical counting, because God assigns a qualitative weight to a person's mitzvot and averos. So it might very well be based on struggle, based on sacrifice, based on background. One mitzvah may be equal to 1,000,000 sins in the calculation. And similarly, a sin may be so severe that it is worth 1,000,000 mitzvahs. So ultimately, the tzaddik Rasha Beinoni is based on a weighting system, but the weighting system is handicapped in various ways that only God knows. Now, the Rambam seems to say a surprising thing. If after this qualitative and quantitative weighing system, a person comes out to be a tzaddik, even if it's only a 51-49, he goes straight to Olam Haba and there's no Gehennom. Now, this is itself a very unusual problem, because what happens to the 49% of Averis that he has? He seems to get a free ride. So the commentaries explain that according to the Rambam, the tzaddik will get his punishment for his sins in this world in order that his Olam Haba should not be diminished by Gehennom. There is a problem, however, that whether you're a tzaddik or a rasha can change by day to day to day to day. So how does God factor in how to do this? But be it as it may, the Rambam's view is that tzaddikim go straight to Olam Haba. And the Rambam also says Beinonim are given the benefit of the doubt, so to speak, and are classified as tzaddikim. So tzaddikim and Beinonim go straight to Olam Haba. A rasha, meaning 51-49 sin, after the qualitative handicapping process, will go to Gehennom, and the amount of time will depend on the Averos, etc. But even after Gehennom, will then go to Olam Haba for the mitzvos that they do. Meaning, the fact that somebody is a rasha does not cause a forfeiture of Olam Haba, because even Rishaim have mitzvot. In fact, they may have 49% of their deeds may be mitzvot, and therefore they go to Olam Haba. Now, this creates a very fascinating asymmetry in reward and punishment, which shows you God's compassion, because punishment for sin is limited in time. We have a tradition that, at least for the overwhelming majority of people, nobody is in Gehennom for more than 12 months. And once you're liberated from Gehennom and you go to Olam Haba, that is eternal. So the reward for mitzvot is eternal. The punishment for sin is normally going to be limited in time. And by the way, even the description of Gehennom as a punishment may not really be an accurate description. Rather, Gehennom should be seen as spiritual therapy to prepare your soul to receive the light of God. That is to say, let's imagine in a physical way, a person broke their legs or broke their hip, etc., shattered their hip. So they have to go through a very, very, very painful, excruciating therapy, and they might be screaming and crying to stop it, stop it, stop it. But it has to be done because it eventually leads to the constructive ability to hopefully walk again. One way of looking at Gehennom, which I think is actually a helpful way of doing, we'd like to avoid it, certainly, just like a person would rather not break their hip and go through the therapy, is Gehennom is the spiritual therapy that repairs the soul, so that after Gehennom, even the rasha will then be able to receive the light of Hashem in Olam Haba. Yeah.
What about the 7 that I mentioned more? We don't get Olam Haba.
Yeah, I'll get to that now. So the point, according to the Rambam, is that Tzadikim get Olam Haba, Beinonim get Olam Haba, and even Rishayim get Olam Haba after they go through a process of purification called Gehennom. Now, what is Olam Haba? So here we have a very important semantic difference between Rambam and Ramban. According to Ramban, the word Olam Haba is limited to the world post-resurrection of the dead, and where the soul goes after death is not called Olam Haba, it is called Gan Eden or Olam HaNeshamot. That's Ramban, and we went over that last week. According to Rambam, however, that is exactly what Olam Haba is. Olam Haba exactly is the world of the soul. There is no physicality. There is no eating. There is no drinking. There is the separation of the soul from the body, and the soul is united with God in the eternal bliss of Olam Haba. Meaning, according to the Rambam, just as a semantic point, the word or the phrase Olam Haba has absolutely nothing to do with physical resurrection. It is entirely a spiritual bliss, and the guf has no role and no function and no place in this Olam Haba. Now, the Rambam then goes on and says that even though even a Rasha can get Olam Haba after they suffer Gehennom, there is indeed a category of people, actually it's a fairly large category, that do not have a share in Olam Haba. Now, here's an interesting question. I'm going to give you a partial listing of who doesn't have a share in Olam Haba, but let's imagine a person dies, and unfortunately they qualify as a person who does not have a share in the world to come. What then happens to such a person? We know what he doesn't have, right? He doesn't have a share in the world to come. What happens? So logically, the notion of an eternal damnation in Gehennom seems to be a relatively incoherent idea, because if the whole purpose of Gehennom is a spiritual therapy to repair the soul to receive the light of God, and it's the Rambam's position that those people who don't have a share of Olam Haba are beyond repair. So if it's non-fixable, you throw it away. So it would appear that for Ein Lo Chelek Li Olam Haba, the consequence is not going to be eternal damnation. The consequence will be obliteration. Or, in a more Kabbalistic way, you could say reabsorption into the infinity of God, as opposed to having an individualized identity, meaning the energy gets reabsorbed. Now, this is very logical, meaning to say eternal damnation is not a logical point. Now, the only question is, well, so how do you deal with Hitler and the like? I mean, it seems to be if Hitler, who almost, I'm willing to bet, does not have a share in Olam Haba, if all that happens to him is obliteration, he kind of gets off a little easy, right? Meaning, a regular run-of-the-mill Russia goes to Gehennom, which is pretty bad, but then goes to Olam Haba. But, okay, so this is a question. I don't have a complete answer to this, but I would just submit that the Rambam's language is mashma, that if a person does not have a share in Olam Haba, what normally happens is obliteration. That's simply it. Now, what's fascinating is, I'm sorry, yeah?
What happens if the families of the family of this person who's obliterated? They start to do massive forgiving his name.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
If this family does good deeds in the name of the person who passed away,
That may have an effect, although it's not clear. I mean, that certainly helps if somebody is a run-of-the-mill Russia. It may not automatically help if someone doesn't have a share in Olam Haba. Now, here is the thing. the Rambam, if you look at the list of the people who don't have a share in Olam Haba, it's not necessarily referring so much to evil actions. It's often said that Judaism is more about deed than creed. And many people might agree with that, but the Rambam would certainly not agree with that. The Rambam gives such a primacy to theologically correct beliefs that he basically says a lot of mistakes in theology, such as that God has number one, if you're an atheist, according to the Rambam, a righteous, charitable, compassionate, good atheist cannot possibly have a share in the world to come because he doesn't believe in God. But even more than that, a person believes in God, but believes that God has a body. Ein lo chelek le'olam haba. A person believes in duality. Ein lo chelek le'olam haba. So, if you're a murderer, a thief, an adulterer, a Shabbos desecrator, a kashrus violator, but you have the right beliefs, according to the Rambam, you go to Gehennom, and then you'll get Olam Haba for the good that you do. But if you're a righteous, saintly atheist, or corporealist, or dualist, or Trinitarian, no matter how good you are, the Rambam closes the door. Now, this is the Rambam's view. There are many who would disagree with this, many who would disagree with this, but it just shows you that the Rambam was very, very fixated on the notion of a correct belief system as being the sine qua non, as being the indispensable condition for admission to Olam Haba. This also applies to non-Jews. It's very, very interesting. We had, I know a lot of people are talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination event. Again, a very tragic thing. A brilliant, really young man, didn't even go to college, but very, very brilliant and very religious person, left a wife and two young children. Very, very tragic. But people are talking about, well, there's someone like Charlie Kirk who was a defender of Israel and a defender of the Jewish people. Does he have a share in the world to come? Now, obviously, only God makes that decision. I don't make that decision one way or the other. But I just want to spell out in the halakhic literature what the analysis would be about somebody like Charlie Kirk. By the way, it's very, very fascinating. Charlie Kirk talked about keeping the Jewish Shabbos, no cell phone, etc. And then he got into some debate. Some guy in the audience once said, hey, the Talmud says, that the Goyim just serve the Jews. What do you say about that? So Charlie Kirk said, Jerusalem Talmud, Babylonian Talmud. And then he said, do you know the difference between Tanakh and Mishnah? Whatever he said. He says, so you got your quote off the internet. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay. By the way, another thing that's amazing. Someone sent me a video of Bill Clinton, something about he was meeting with a bunch of clergy in Ohio during the Monica Lewinsky scandal. He happened to be on a campaign trip. So one rabbi went over to him and said, before it was done, he says, Mr. President, you really have to do Teshuvah. And then he started to try to explain what Teshuvah was, and Bill Clinton says, no, don't worry about it. Do you mean Rav Soloveitchik's model or Rav Kook's? This was true. Okay. So you never know. But here's the thing. According to the Rambam, Trinitarian Christianity is idolatry. So that means by definition, whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew, they cannot get Olam Haba no matter what their virtue is, because they have an idolatrous belief in God. Now, Rabbeinu Tam, that's why the Rambam famously, we talked about this earlier, the Rambam famously differentiates between Christianity, which in his time was really only Catholicism and maybe Coptic, there was no Reformation. The Rambam differentiates between Christianity and Islam, where the Rambam maintains that Christianity is idolatry even under the Noahide code, as opposed to Islam, which is a monotheistic religion. So according to the Rambam, a good Christian cannot get a share in the world to come because he is an idolater. Now, Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, who of course lived in Catholic France, took the position that although from our perspective Christianity is a false belief, it's an erroneous belief, but it is not an idolatrous belief, because ultimately there is still that connection to one God. And therefore, Rabbeinu Tam took the very important position that a Christian is not in violation. Again, we're not endorsing it, it's a mistaken belief, but a Christian is not in violation of the Noahide code. And therefore, according to the Rambam, such a Christian may qualify as a righteous Gentile that would have a share in the world to come. So when you look at the Charlie Kirk situation, so we would say that according to Rabbeinu Tam, he would qualify as a righteous Gentile for Olam Haba. According to the Rambam, not. But there's a whole other approach that basically says that even if a person is an idolater and or an atheist and has incorrect beliefs, God still rewards them for the good that they've done. That's a different orientation than the Rambam. In other words, you could analyze the Charlie Kirk situation in terms of the technical issue. Is Christianity Avodah Zarah or not? But the other way of analyzing is it's irrelevant because God still rewards the good that even an atheist does. But again, that's not the Rambam's position. Okay. Be it as it may, these are those that don't have a share in Olam Haba. But a Rasha who theologically has the correct beliefs, even if his behaviors are repulsive, gets Gehennom, but after the Gehennom will get Olam Haba for the mitzvos that they do. And again, according to the Rambam, Olam Haba is not resurrection of the dead. Olam Haba is the world of the soul, what the Ramban called Gan Eden, or Olam HaNishamot, and that is eternal. I'll mention resurrection of the dead in a minute in terms of where the Rambam puts it in. Now, one other thing that the Rambam mentions that's very, very fascinating. This rule that a Rasha goes to Gehennom is only if he didn't do Teshuvah before he died. If a person does Teshuvah, even on their deathbed, all of their sins are erased, and he does go straight to Olam Haba. So that's a wonderful thing, that Teshuvah can prevent Gehennom straight to Olam Haba. But then the Rambam brings another law that's very, very fascinating, and that is, there is such a phenomenon called negative Teshuvah. What do we mean? The same way regret on my sins erases and forgives my sin, God forbid a person could regret his mitzvot. Meaning, let's say a person was Torah observant. Either he was an FFB, either he was born from, or was a Baal Teshuvah, and then leaves it, goes off the derech, whatever language you want to use. Now, there are two different ways a person might go off the derech. One way is, I'm happy I lived a Torah life, but it's just too hard for me, so I can't do it anymore. But I don't regret what I did. Under those circumstances, you still have your mitzvot, and at the end of your life, God will count your mitzvahs, count your averos, and there'll be Olam Haba for the mitzvahs. But let's say, chas v'sholem, a person's attitude is not simply, I don't want to be religious anymore. But a person's attitude was, I am sorry I ever did that stupid stuff. It was a waste of time. All of my friends, went to law school, and I got stuck in Kollel for 10 years. I regret, I wish I never did it. That's a very scary thing. Under those circumstances, you lose it. Now, you can do tshuva on that, which is interesting. You can do tshuva on your regret, even if you don't do tshuva on the sin. Meaning, I was a Shomer Shabbos. I became a Mechalel Shabbos. I regret that I kept Shabbos. I lose all my Shabboses. If I do tshuva on my regret, I get my Shabboses back, even if I still didn't do tshuva on desecrating Shabbos. Meaning, I'm still not keeping Shabbos, but at least I get my prior Shabboses back. This is a category called Toah ala Rishonos, which means I regret the action that I did. And this is not an all or nothing, by the way. You'd be very surprised, but if a moment's reflection will show you that this is something we can easily fall into on a individualized mitzvah basis. Aliyah may be a not uncommon example. A person comes to Eretz Yisrael, and life is hard, and one does not make the living that they feel they need to make. Sometimes people go back. But it all depends on what is your attitude when you go back. If the idea was, I wish I could have made it here, but I'm not able to make it here. So they do retain the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael for the time they were here. But let's say, and I have numerous examples in hate mail that I get, where people literally express a hatred towards living in Israel, a hatred, not just I can't make it. And they say, I regret the day that I ever, came to Eretz Yisrael. Well, you know what happens? They lose. They could have been here 20 years. They lose all of the mitzvot of Yishuv Eretz, not all of their mitzvot as a whole, but the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. They lose because they regret that they did it. If you regret a mitzvah that you did, you lose the benefit of that mitzvah. So I call this negative tshuva. Just like you can do tshuva on your sins, chas v'shalom, rachmana litzlan, you can do tshuva on your mitzvot. And if you do tshuva on your mitzvot, you lose them. But if you do tshuva on your regret, you can gain them. You can indeed gain them back. So with Aliyah in particular, a person might go through this day by day by day. Monday, I wish I never came here. Tuesday, it's really wonderful. So just be sure that the day that you die, the positive thought is the one that you leave the world with, because that's going to be a very, very important ending. Yeah.
The people who are so regretful, why are they so bitter? What happened to them?
Well, I mean, it's a funny thing. I mean, in the litany of complaints they mention, these are the complaints that everybody goes through: the rudeness, the crowdedness, the lack of consideration, whatever they go on. But obviously there are internal factors, and I mean the fact that identical things can happen to two different people, and some people can laugh at it, and some people can take it in stride, and other people get broken and crushed. Obviously, it's not the objective event; it's the person's reaction, which can go back to all sorts of traumas, even in childhood. But the point is, it's also a way of self-protection by blaming Israel instead of saying, I got problems that I have to work out. It's like you're projecting the problem onto someone else. Although there is a story, I'll tell you a little story. They tell the mashal about Eretz Yisrael. Hasidic Rabbi gave this mashal. There was a princess, the daughter of a king, who was beautiful and talented and wise, and she was like the greatest shidduch possible. And somehow she was set up when she was set up with people that were not matim to her. So she would dress ugly and look ugly and pretend to be stupid, because she didn't want to reject the person. She wanted the person to reject her, and that way the person would not be embarrassed. So they say, it's a very bit of a sharp mashal. They say that when a person is not deserving of Eretz Yisrael, so instead of Eretz Yisrael rejecting the person, Eretz Yisrael makes itself repulsive to that person. So the person feels that they're rejecting Israel. In a way, it's kind of a kindness, like the princess will look ugly, so the person won't feel so bad that they weren't able to make it. So that's, again, it's a bit of a sharp statement. And again, I don't want to be harsh. I mean, there are people who can't make it, and I understand that. But all I'm saying is, saying that you can't make it or it's too difficult is very, very different than kind of the hatred, mamish, the hatred that is expressed in these letters. I mean, I am a very, very mild proponent of Aliyah, meaning I do not push it aggressively in any class that I give in Or Sameach. But I say it's something that one should think about. That's all I basically say. You got to consider it. And I was accused of sending my impressionable students to their deaths and giving them a miserable life. And how dare I do that when I didn't come till I was 56, et cetera, with my big American pension. Yeah, okay. So what I'm saying is it's become a very, very irrational hatred, where even if you suggest that people should consider Aliyah, not that they have to come, they should consider Aliyah. For some people, this becomes something that upsets them tremendously. Okay, be it as it may. There's another condition the Rambam says, besides theologically correct beliefs, the Rambam says another very fascinating condition that's a little bit odd. He says, in order to get into Olam Haba, you have to do at least one mitzvah in your life, one time, that is totally for the sake of God without ulterior motive. Which means, even if I did 1 trillion mitzvot, if I didn't have one that wasn't 100% pure, I can't get in. Now, once I have that one and I get in, I will then get rewarded for the billion that I did. I don't lose the billion because they weren't totally for the sake of heaven. But for Olam Haba, I got to do one. And the Rambam says that he offers this as an explanation of the famous statement of Rav Chananya ben Akashia, who says, Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lizakos es Yisrael. Hashem wanted to give merit to the Jewish people. Lefikach hirbe lahem Torah u'mitzvos. Therefore, he gave them many, many different kinds of mitzvah. So the Rambam explains, by Hashem giving a big, wide variety of different types of commandments, it's impossible that a person will not have one opportunity to get it right. And therefore, this will be the key for admission to Olam Haba. So far, there is death, there is Gehennom for Rishayim, and then if you've made the admission conditions, Olam Haba, the world of the soul, where does resurrection of the dead come in at all? So the Rambam says, of course there is physical resurrection of the dead. I believe in that. But it's not eternal. It's not forever. What will happen is that sometime after Mashiach comes, and I'll go back to Mashiach in a moment, it could be right after Mashiach comes, it could be 100 years after Mashiach comes, it could be 1,000 years, it could be 10,000 years after Mashiach comes. God will unite the soul into the bodies, and they'll live a long life, and then they'll die, and that's it. And what happens after they die? Where do their souls go? Back to Olam Haba. Very, very strange. According to the Rambam, Techiyas HaMesim is just an event. It is not eternal. It is not the eternal reward. The only eternal reward is Olam Haba, which is Olam HaNeshamot. But God will demonstrate his mastery over the laws of nature by temporarily reinserting the soul back into the body, and they will come back to life, and they will live a life under the Mashiach, etc. And then they will die. And it's a one-time thing. It's not going to happen over and over again. It's a one-time thing. And then they were taken from Olam Haba. They're going to go back to Olam Haba. So one issue is, there are really two related problems. According to the Rambam's definition of Techiyat HaMeitim, that is, number one, what's the point? What's the purpose? According to Ramban, Techiyat HaMeisim is the end point of everything. It is essentially the collapsing of the boundary between Olam Haba and Olam Hazeh, in which God unites body and soul in the eternal bliss of this earth. So this earth becomes Olam Haba. This earth becomes Gan Eden. This earth brings us back to Adam and Chava before the Chet. And Techiyas HaMesim, according to Ramban last week, is eternal, forever. There will never be death again. And Olam HaNeshamot is simple, as beautiful as it is simply the holding pen as they await resurrection. So according to Ramban, Techiyat HaMeitim is Olam Haba. But according to the Rambam, it's just a thing that God will do. It's a great miracle, to be sure. But number one, what's the purpose of it? Like, why? And what makes it so fundamental? Because it is one of the Rambam's 13 principles of faith. And the Rambam says, if you don't believe in Techiyat HaMeitim, you don't have a share in Olam Haba. So, in many, many ways, I think you can understand why the critics of the Rambam maintained he really was not taking this so seriously, because I don't want to use the word trivialize, that's not a respectful word, but essentially, the Rambam's definition of physical resurrection is almost a trivialization of it. And that is why in the Moreh Nevuchim, when the Rambam discusses ultimate reward for mitzvot, the Rambam doesn't even mention resurrection. Because in his scheme of things, resurrection is not a reward. Resurrection is just a miracle that demonstrates God's mastery over the laws of nature. Now, the Rambam he fetches something out, he tries to show why it has to be temporary. The Rambam says that in order for a miracle to be seen as a miracle, it can't be permanent, because then it becomes part of the laws of nature. He says, if there would be resurrection of the dead and they'd live forever, it would no longer be a miracle, because that would simply be the natural way of things. So he says, definitionally, miracles have to be temporary, right? The Korach's pit that opened up has to close up. The Red Sea has to come together again. So the Rambam says, Techiyat HaMeitim is like Kriyas Yamsuf. It's like Korach. So here, in order to understand, so this is the Rambam. So you see the major difference again between Rambam and Ramban. According to Ramban, the spiritual world of the soul is only as beautiful as it is, and there's no physicality, is called Gan Eden, Olam HaNeshamot, and it is the holding place until there is resurrection of the dead, which is eternal, and that is Olam Haba. That's Ramban. According to Rambam, it is exactly the opposite. The Olam HaNeshamot is the eternal Olam Haba. Techiyat HaMeitim is going to be a sporadic, one-time reunification of the soul into the body. They will then die, and they'll go back to Olam Haba. And the only thing that's nitzchi, the only thing that is eternal, is the spiritual existence of Olam Haba. And the Rambam again makes the point, there is no body. Why do you need a body in Olam Haba? The only thing that matters is the soul, the spiritual essence. And even though Chazal describe eating and drinking and the like, those are metaphors, by using physical pleasure as a metaphor for the spiritual joy of being connected to God. Now, the question then becomes, though, as I say, okay, like the Rambam, what is the purpose? What is the ultimate point of Techiyat HaMeitim? So to understand this a little bit, we need to mention a third term, Yemot HaMashiach, right? We mentioned Olam Haba, Techiyat HaMeitim, Yemot HaMashiach. Now here, in terms of Yemot HaMashiach, Rambam and Ramban more or less have a very similar description. Yemot HaMashiach is not Olam Haba, according to all opinions. Yemot HaMashiach is here and now in this physical world. There will be a king who will be descended from David HaMelech, and how will he be recognized? That's a very excellent question in our very polarized Jewish world. If he's a Satmar, whatever, Satmar, Chabad, Dati Liyumi, a soldier in the Hester unit, no matter who he is, there's going to be a problem in people accepting him. Maybe I'll leave that for another time. But assuming we have our Mashiach, Mashiach has a mission. It is to bring all the Jewish people back to Eretz Yisrael if they haven't come already. It is to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. It is to usher in a world of peace, and indeed it is said that even the Umot HaOlam are going to recognize the Mashiach, the Anointed One, as the spiritual leader of the world. Prophecy will come back into the world, and the whole world will be living at a higher moral plane of goodness and the like. And of course, there will be a Beit HaMikdash. And although the nations of the world will not become Jewish, but they will worship one God. And the Beit HaMikdash will be a center for the entire world, as we say, Ki Beisi Beis Tefillah Yikarei L'chol Ha'amim. My house shall be a house of prayer for all of the nations. So Yemot HaMashiach is wonderful, but here is what the Rambam says. Other than these great miraculous things, life under Mashiach will be normal, meaning the following. World peace, Beis HaMikdash, ingathering of exiles, a world of goodness. Yeah, that's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But you're still going to have to get a job. You're still going to have to wait for the buses. Your air conditioning may break down. And there'll be more people here, so it'll be even a larger waiting time. There will still be death and sickness, although not as much, but there'll still be sickness. Meaning, the Rambam Shita of Yemot HaMashiach is Olam Keminhago Noheg. Life will go on as normal. In fact, there will be people who will even be complaining about Mashiach because they want to do stuff on Shabbos that they won't be able to do anymore. And no, we're turning this country into a theocracy. What's going on here? Kefiyah datit may become a real issue in the times of Mashiach and the like. Now, here is the interesting question: What is the purpose of a Messianic era? Because Mashiach is going to die until Tchiyat HaMeitim, and there'll be a son of Mashiach. It'll be a hereditary monarchy. So it's not the ultimate world. I mean, even if you're around when Mashiach comes, and of course before Mashiach comes, there'll be the birth pains of Mashiach and all of that. Hopefully, we've gone through it, or we are going through it. There won't be anything worse. But people are going to die. Now, what's going to happen when you die? You're going to go to Olam Haba. So what exactly is the purpose of Yemot HaMashiach at all? Now, this sounds like a heretical question, but what is Mashiach giving to us that Olam Haba can't take over? So the Rambam says the following idea. Mashiach comes, it removes a lot of the distractions, a lot of the difficulties, a lot of the nisyonot, making the keeping of the Torah much easier. And therefore we'll be able to do more mitzvos. We'll have less of a Yetzer Hara for Averos. And therefore, the Rambam says, this may sound very surprising, the purpose of Yemot HaMashiach is to give us a chance to increase our Olam Haba by more good deeds and the avoidance of Averos. That God removes the distractions, removes the nisyonot, removes the trials, removes the challenges. Kedei shenizkeh liolam haba. So now, the truth of the matter is, this itself, yeah, someone else, this itself is actually a problem, right? The Rambam is suggesting that by God making things easier for us, we'll have more mitzvos and more reward and more Olam Haba. That's what the Rambam is saying. But you see the problem? Pirkei Avos makes the opposite claim. Lefum Sarah Agra. According to the suffering is the reward. Meaning to say, I'll make up numbers. Numbers are meaningless. If I do a mitzvah in a world of struggle, it counts for a 10. If I do a mitzvah when there's no struggle, it only counts for a 5. So what's the Rambam saying? Hashem gives us Yemot Mashiach, so we'll get more Olam Haba. Lehepech, I would get more Olam Haba in the world of struggle. But the answer might be that quantity might beat out the quality, meaning like this. It's true that a mitzvah that I do in the world of struggle counts a lot more than the mitzvah that I do when there's no struggle. But when there's no struggle, I'll do more mitzvahs. So consequently, if in this, I'm going to make up numbers. The numbers are meaningless. If in this world, I do 1,000 mitzvahs, each one out of 10, but in Yemot Mashiach, I'll do 10,000 mitzvahs, each one out of 5. So I'll still wind up with more Olam Haba, simply because by removing the Yetzer Hara, removing the distractions, removing the Nisyonot, I can be Zocha to a greater Olam Haba. Now that doesn't mean I will be, because I still have free will, but I will be given the opportunity. Now, if you take this somewhat unusual idea, meaning if you ask most people, why Mashiach? They're not going to say, I have Mashiach in order that I should get more Olam Haba. But that's what the Rambam says. So here's the question. This makes sense for the people who will be alive when Mashiach comes. But what about all of the earlier generations who lived in the world of struggle and nisayon? How will they get a chance to do more mitzvot free of nisayon? The answer is, that is where Techiyat HaMeitim comes in. He brings them back, gives them a normal lifespan, so they could partake in the bonus of Yemot HaMashiach for the purpose of going back to Olam Haba. So the point I'm making is that the temporary nature of Techiyat HaMeitim actually fits the Rambam's understanding of Yemot HaMashiach very, very nicely. Because if the purpose of Yemot HaMashiach is Kedei Sheniskeh Olam Haba, Techiyat HaMeitim is the mechanism by which the prior generations are given that zechut.
Babies born during Techiyat HaMeitim.
Yeah, so that yeah. So again, it seems like the Ramban that Techiyat HaMeitim is the end point. There will not be any births after that point. Like the Rambam, presumably there will be, because Mashiach will still be going on, meaning the Mason will die, they go to Olam Haba, but there'll still be people in this world. In fact, Yemot Mashiach, according to the Rambam, might go on forever and ever and ever, meaning you'll constantly have people born, die, born, die, born, die. And those who die after Techiyat HaMeitim are not going to come back at all, because they've already had their Messianic period. In other words, it would appear that Techiyat HaMeitim is for those people who were not alive when Mashiach came. Anyone alive when Mashiach comes, one might argue, would not have Techiyat HaMeitim because they were given the chance to be marbe their Olam Haba. Say what? I didn't hear you. Say again? I didn't say again? I didn't say. Yeah.
The world is going to be destroyed.
Well, it doesn't say the world will be destroyed. There'll be a lot of casualties, a lot of destruction. Yeah. That's part of the pains of Mashiach. There is a huge machlokas, by the way, unfortunately in a way, is Gog Magog pre-Messianic, which we hope it is, or is it actually post-Messianic? Some say after Mashiach comes, there will be the war. In fact, the Rambam says Gog and Magog is after Mashiach comes, which means we haven't seen the worst of it yet. But many do argue with the Rambam. Many say Gog and Magog is a pre-Messianic struggle.
Remind me, please, of why the Rambam, I'm sorry, maybe a few months ago, why the Rambam wrote this. What is the purpose of us we know this? I mean, us or the people at that time.
Well, you asked me why the Rambam wrote this letter?
Yeah,
Well, the Rambam wrote the letter as a self-defense. He was accused of being a heretic, denying physical resurrection, because he always emphasizes Olam Haba, so he needed to explain his position. Now, keep in mind, though, that because of the Rambam's emphasis on correct theology, if you don't have these ideas correctly, you can lose your Olam Haba. In a way, it's a little bit of a non sequitur. If I don't believe in physical resurrection, I lose my share in Olam Haba, even though Olam Haba is not connected to physical resurrection. In a way, it's even difficult to see why there would be a connection. But still, the Mishnah says it in Sanhedrin. Kol Yisrael, all of Israel has a share in Olam Haba, and those who don't is people who deny Techiyat HaMesim. So it says in the Mishnah Beferish, if you deny Techiyat HaMesim, you don't have a share in Olam Haba. Okay, we'll stop here. I want to wish yeah.
You brought the whole sheet there beautifully, and we see how he sees things.
He does not. I mean, he points out, but this is not a proof, that when Yecheskel Hanavi revived the dried bones and brought them back to life, they died, and he said that is the paradigm for resurrection of the dead, but there's no particular proof that is the paradigm for resurrection of the dead.
He brought a parable between saying Kaddish for 11 or 12 months, according to Ramban.
Yeah.
So how would the Rambam explain? What would you do for a parent?
No, I think it's the identical process that a person may go to Gehennom, and Kaddish is a way of helping a parent and not to be in Gehennom. Well, he doesn't say, but I assume that he wouldn't disagree with the statement in Chazal. Okay, I want to wish everybody a Shana Tova Masuka, Ksiv Chima Tova, good Geben Shior, and may Hashem bring blessing to all of OUisrael.